You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Hello and welcome to TFM's local watering hole, and your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to listen to this podcast and then contact us on social media and tell us what you think. And with me, so excited to have back, IMF agent Christy Morris.
You're not supposed to use my real name.
Oh, I thought I made that one up. That's not really your real name. I mean, Christy Morris, that just sounds like a fake name anyway. So, you know,
right? Yeah.
That's your,
no, my real name is Grace, the cat burglar.
Fantastic. So, well, I'm so excited to be back in the Mission Impossible universe finally, as we got Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. But just a few quick things before we dive into talking about this ridiculously awesome film. That's right, I gave it away. You can find us all over social media, on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram and Threads at the 602 Club TFM. You can find the entire network online at Trek FM, or Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Of course, we've got the listeners only discussion group. You can join listeners from all over the world talking about all the different episodes that are happening here on the network. And of course, you can go over to Patreon at patreon.com/Trek FM and become part of our team. Make sure that all of these great podcasts keep coming to you each and every week. We definitely need your help to do that. It costs a lot to put all this out, and we can't do it without you. So again, go over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you could be part of the team. So Chrissy, I think, we've talked about all of the previous Mission Impossible movies here and had absolute blast being able to do that. And one of the things I thought was really interesting as we dive into this film is the fact that we actually learn more about the IMF as an organization, in the sense of how their agents get chosen and how do people become a part of the IMF. And this was something that was really, fascinating to me, because I think we've, seen people come in and out of the IMF and be part of it. But this kind of set some interesting rules as to why people become actual agents in the field. And that was really, again, this is, I think, the 7th film in the series. Mm-hmm. And so to finally get that, I thought was a really cool thing we've always been building this universe, but we are truly building this universe still in this movie.
Yeah, I love that this one wasn't just about the missions. They're really getting more and more into the heart and the character of the people behind the missions. And so I love that they added that depth to it this time, especially. It's always been about Ethan and how the people in his life play a role into everything that he's doing, or, him trying to keep them out of it. But here it's really about people having the choice, that ultimately it's still about free will. It's just once you accept the mission, or, make the choice to accept being in IMF, you realize that you don't have any other life. You've now committed to this for the rest of yours. That also you will be disavowed by the United States if you're ever questioned about who you work for. So you don't have any allies except other IMF agents at that point. But I love how they actually had the other agents tell Grace, what life did you have before this anyway? You were really just being selfish and always trying to get by doing the next job anyway. So how is this not better than that?
Yeah, it's something that, we've talked about so many times on this show, And with so many of the films that we've watched, the thematic element of selflessness and selfishness comes up, right?
Mhm.
And, I think you're absolutely right. We have that conversation there with Grace and with Benji and Ethan and Luther. And, he calls it out, what life, right? Like, what life did you have? And, the fact that this life is that she's living is one that's always on the edge, right, of being caught and, getting in trouble. And it's a life that's lived only for oneself. And this allows you to be a part of something bigger. And, a lot is made of this film, too, in the sense that people almost making fun of the idea of working for the greater good. Instead, and what's better for all people, not just a specific few, right? And people jockeying for position here and there, especially when we'll talk about later the ideas of power and everything. But, the IMF exists to do the impossible, to keep the world from falling into a type of chaos. And it's people who are willing to put their lives on the line for what's better for everyone involved at the expense of their own lives, right? They're giving up their life for the lives of everyone. And, obviously Ethan's a great example of this, but so is everybody on his team. And so I think, that's something that it was really great to learn, is the fact that you join the IMF because you don't necessarily have a ton of choices left, but you still do have a choice. So like you said, this is about free will. And, you can live your life in prison. You can live your life on the run, which may not last very long. Or you can live your life giving it for the betterment of all people, trying to keep wars from happening and those kind of things. And so, yeah, I thought it was great for us to be able to learn that. And I think, too, when you're creating more films in a franchise, I think it's also a smart thing to do to continue to world build as you move forward, to let people know, more about this world that they're spending time in, and in some ways it's creating basically the rules to which this world plays by. And here's a big one, that this is the main way that IMF agents are chosen. Not always, but a lot of times. We've seen other agents kind of become a part, I think, of Jeremy Renner's character, and, that doesn't seem like he was chosen for the IMF for that reason. But we don't know. So I just think it's one of those things where I was not expecting it going into this film, that we would get to know more about the IMF after all of these films, but I was really glad that we actually did.
Yeah, same here. I think that it gives you so much more to the story and more weight to follow. You have to have more stakes than just the missions themselves. So I'm glad that they added all of this additional stuff to it.
That's a good way to put it. Needing more weight to everything. In the sense of like, yeah, absolutely. When you're getting more of these characters over and over again, having a deeper understanding as to the why they are, and the why of why they do what they do is great. And, no better example of that than in this film, where we learn a lot more about Ethan's past and how he came to the IMF and his connection with the villain, and possibly even more.
Definitely. I think that, here with Ethan, we've seen before, obviously he's had significant others and lots of different partners in just IMF itself, with characters like Ilsa. But here we're actually seeing that this villain that in this movie has actually been in his past previously, with Gabriel when he lost Marie, and showing that actually Gabriel was responsible and now it's like a ghost from his past come back to haunt him. And so it's not just another mission this time for him. It's deeply personal, and it's like he's not able to shake all of these flashbacks to feeling responsible for everyone.
I mean, we've seen things be personal for Ethan before. You especially think of Mission Impossible 3, where, he has met this woman and they are in a relationship, they get married, and she's in danger, and that relationship has played out throughout, subsequent films as well, all the way into Fallout. Mm-hmm. And so we've known some stuff about Ethan's past, but to realize and to know that Ethan came to the point because of the life that he had gotten caught up in left him with a decision to make. You can choose the IMF or not. And if you don't, most likely it sounds like he was going to go into prison. But for the skills that he had, they saw potential in him that would be wasted. His first best destiny became being in the IMF. And like you said, being connected very viscerally to this villain as being the one who had killed Marie, which we only really see in flashbacks. And so this is something that I got to call out David over in Tatooine Sons. We've gotten to know each other over on Twitter, and he keyed me into this, that Grace is wearing the same necklace as Marie is in flashbacks. Like, and this is a blink and you'll miss it Easter egg. And which then would explain why the entity has brought Grace and Ilsa together as the choice. And the reasoning is that Grace is his daughter.
Possibly.
Yeah, exactly. But it would also explain why the entity would pit his love for Ilsa and for Grace against one another, and why Ethan would tell Grace that her life will always mean more to him than his own, even though they just met. Which, anybody I know that's been a parent will tell you the moment you meet your child, you do anything for them, right? I even think of, in Star Trek Picard, Riker talks about this idea of, you'd burn the whole world just to make sure they're safe. And so I think, to me, this made a lot of sense of a lot of what we see in the film and then end up hearing in the film, and why this becomes so personal for Ethan, because, this person then is responsible for taking somebody away from him that meant a lot. Possibly, as we're saying, the mother of his child. And then now possibly not only taking away the woman he's fallen in love with in Ilsa, but his child, and making this impossible choice, right? And so I love this read, and I can't wait now, to see part 2, to see this play out, because I think that this is right on track, and it makes things make more sense, because otherwise, to me, it doesn't make sense as to why Ethan would care so much about Grace. Like, I know that he cares about everybody, right, that he deals with, but like, to make this so personal where you would actually pit these two women against each other, it seems strange if this isn't the case for him to have Ilsa and Grace pitted against him as to which one survives.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. And I didn't think of that when I was watching the movie. As it sounds like you didn't either until David said that to you. But initially I just defended it to myself as, well, he values all human life, even the one. So that would make sense, I guess, in that sense. But it does kind of feel like, yeah, but if they just met that one time in the airport and she's a thief and that's all he knows about her, right, why would it be such a hard choice between the two of them?
Right. And specifically between a woman that we've seen him grow to love, obviously, through these last couple of films, and into this one. And, then, like you said, this woman he literally just met. And so And I think, what this does is this accentuates Ethan's character as well from his past all the way to now, which is that Ethan is very much somebody who, people kind of malign him in the film, especially Gabriel, saying that, he just uses people for the mission. And what we see throughout all of the films, and including this one, is that nobody to Ethan is expendable. Right. And he's working to save every single person he possibly can. Even people, he might have just met. And so I think, not only does this read make it mean something so much more, but I do think that it makes even more sense than it just being about, Ethan caring about everybody. Alec Baldwin's character says in Fallout, there's some flaw in you that won't allow you to care more about, all people than just the one. But he also says that I think it's actually your greatest asset, not your weakness. And so I think that, that's what we're showing here in this film, that it is his greatest asset, that he would care more about the whole, which is everyone, which means he cares just as much about the one as he does about everyone. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely on a roll there, because I thought immediately of Kittredge, I believe, that said to him, you have to pick a side. Whose side are you on? The United States or one of these other groups that want the key? And he's like, I'm on everyone's side, I want to save the whole world, not just one group. And that for Ethan, it's all about selfless service to everyone. And like you said, not valuing the greater good or just the one person over one another. It's about the whole.
Yeah, I love it. I'm so, David, we were talking about it the day after I saw the movie, and because I'd seen him tweet something about it, and so I kind of went into the movie looking specifically, and the more we talked about it, I kind of was like, maybe he's her daughter, and then we talked through everything, and then he pointed out the thing about the necklace, and then I went back and I saw the movie today, and I was able to see that as well, and it really is such a quick moment, but I think it makes the movie even better if that's the case then in the end. And it makes
I hope they tell us.
Yes. I mean, I'm sure they will here in part 2. So, which leads us to the fact that we have a new addition to the Mission Impossible family in Grace, played by Haley Atwell. And I'm really interested to see, just what you thought about her being a part of the team and, Haley playing this role.
Well, I have to say, first of all, I love the character. I think that they definitely gave her some complexity, whether or not she ends up being Ethan's daughter. Since I didn't initially catch on to that being a possibility anyway, I'm just thinking about all the other aspects of her. So, since we've talked about it in the past that I love characters like Catwoman, there's some similarities here. She's very great at pickpocketing, as Ethan says, but are you great at put pocketing? Which was kind of silly, but you got it. And she's just got, the actress, as well as, how she plays the character, is very mischievous, but you can tell ultimately has a good heart and just went through a lot of trauma that led her to this life. And so now I love that they had her become the person who at the meeting between her and Kittredge says, would I be selling too much? Or I realized what I would be selling was too much. And that's selling her soul. She realized that although $100 million is really attractive, that ultimately she would be handing over ultimate power to somebody, and it could be in the wrong hands. And so what kind of price do you put on that? And so I love that she had that turn to realize what she was doing and decide to decline. And I just think that Haley Atwell is awesome. Obviously, I think we both loved her as Peggy Carter. She's done a million other great things. And then here, I think she was the best new addition to the team that can really stand on her own. And, stand up to the acting chops of Rebecca Ferguson and Tom Cruise and be a respected part of the team.
Yeah, I really like all of that. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I love Haley Atwell. I think she's fantastic. And I've wanted her to be able to be in more things like this. And I think, especially getting a chance to rewatch the film with the read that, she's his daughter, which was fascinating. There's a lot of things that she does then that feel like Ethan Hunt and his mischievous nature, his playful nature, the fact that
going rogue.
Yes, exactly. But also the fact that she can do the magic tricks like he can do, just little things like that kind of, that there's this, DNA resemblance of them. I also looked up too, she is young enough to be Tom's daughter. And so, that I think even just in that reality, but I agree with you. She's such a fantastic addition to this. I think in some ways she has some of those sensibilities that Rebecca Ferguson's Ilsa did as well, which is this playfulness to her, her ability to, back and forth conversations with Tom Cruise and his Ethan Hunt, for that to feel very comfortable, to feel as though you're almost like speaking to an equal, instead of there being this weird, imbalance there, I think is phenomenal. And so I think this casting was one of Macquarie's best choices here in this movie. And it's one of those things where, much like Rebecca Ferguson's Ilsa's introduction in Rogue Nation, I leave this movie only wanting more of her, not less.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing that is great. I mean, that's when you have successfully introduced a new character, when the audience leaves being like, okay, that character that was new, they better be in that next movie, and they better be in that next movie a lot. I'm going to be frustrated. I think Haley Atwell's performance pulls that off. But I also think it's the chemistry then she has with the rest of the characters that really makes this work. Specifically, of course, working with Tom Cruise. And you need her to have that chemistry with him, so it feels very almost natural and normal from the beginning, especially, like we've postulated here, that they're related, and so I'm so excited that she's a part of this universe. And I would say a big part of that is just, I love this actress in the first place. I think she's done such great work in all the stuff that she's been in previously that I've seen her in. I think she's always kind of deserved this type of role, and I'm so glad she's finally been given it.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I'm with you 1,000%.
Because I liked the fact that we had her do the Peggy Carter show, but I feel like in many ways this character was just kind of wasted in the MCU, as was the actress. We just didn't give her enough to do, which is kind of a travesty that was the case.
Yeah, because I mean, too, like, I really think of, after seeing her in this role, other similar actresses we've seen, and how they all do their different characters so well. She reminds me of like how we felt about seeing Ana de Armas in Bond, and
That's
then
great pull,
even like a Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman. I think that Haley Atwell could do something of that caliber at this point because of seeing how she did with this.
No, you mentioned the idea of like having a Catwoman, like, Haley Atwell as Catwoman. Sign me up for that. I will take that all day. So you hear to hear, folks. Christy called it.
Yep. I mean, she's already got the magic tricks down, so.
Well, and I mean, she just has, I think, the wonderful personality, right? To be able to pull off the playfulness that you want. especially with her and a Bruce, Bruce Wayne. This is the type of this is the type of relationship where you could totally turn that into having the more sexual tension that those two characters have. So 100%, I think, yeah, do it. Just do it. On the other side of the coin, we have Ilsa's character, and, she's been here now. This is her third Mission Impossible film, and we have a death. And I wanted to ask you how you felt about this, because I found it to be kind of shocking that we were going to do this. I did not expect coming into this film, that we would lose the character of Ilsa.
Yeah, that was something that actually did kind of bother me a little bit, because for one, like you said, not expecting that this was going to be the end of the line for her altogether, but then also feeling like, although, this clearly does have an impact on Ethan, the way that she died, it just seemed a little bit anticlimactic for what I would expect for such an impactful character in the previous films. Did you feel that way at all?
So I think actually the read of Grace being Hunt's daughter and her saving Grace's life makes it better. In the sense that, and I'm wondering if, of course, with part 2, we would learn that, Ethan told Ilsa about that, because there seems to be all of these looks happening between them, especially in that scene at the party where they're giving these looks, like these knowing looks back and forth. And that, of course, who Ilsa is somebody who does not back down from a fight or a challenge or any of those things. And so I think, to me, that actually is something that if this truly is the case with the film, and that, she is his daughter, then Ilsa dying to protect Grace, I think, makes that so much more impactful. I mean, it's obviously terrible in the sense that this reminds Ethan of Marie. And of course, now it makes the decision of whether or not he kills Gabriel at that moment on the train even much more difficult for him, right? Like, you've taken away 2 of the people he's loved. It impacts the whole idea of, Ethan struggling to have people get close to him, and, always trying to keep people at arm's length. And yet at the same time, he's a human being who needs love, wants love, friendship, all of those things. And so I think that it was hard to have happen, because I love this character, and I love Rebecca Ferguson as the character. I think she's been so phenomenal in this series. And so it was, even watching it a second time, I was like, oh, I don't want to lose her presence. But I also feel like it's one of those things too, that it's such a part of what's also going to come in part 2, that I don't know if I have the full impact of it yet. Right? Like, it has a massive impact here, but I think there's a further impact coming in part 2 with her death that is going to be even more poignant. So I'm with you in the sense that, like, I think it just makes me feel uneasy, and I think that's the way it should. Any major character that dies in a film, it shouldn't leave you feeling like, oh man, I was so glad they died, and I totally know why. That, it's like you want to feel badly for the character. You want to feel kind of lost and kind of morose about the fact that a character has died. And so I think, in the sense that what you're articulating is exactly why I'm glad that I feel that way, because I wouldn't feel this way if I didn't already love this character and the performance given by the actress, over these 3 films in the first place.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say, if it ends up that they do confirm in part 2 that Grace is indeed Ethan's daughter, then this scene will hit a little differently for me and may make me feel more satisfied with the way it happened. But yeah, at the moment, I guess the thing that had bothered me was that I get the intent of them not having Ethan make it there in time, but it kind of felt like one of your major characters died, amongst 2 other people, and one of them barely knew her, and Ethan wasn't there at all. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like sometimes it hits even more if somehow he was seeing it happen, or if there were more people around. You know what I mean? It just felt like, oh, it was, a back alley somewhere in Venice.
Yeah, I mean, as the kids would say, it hits different, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
no,
we'll
I mean, and I guess there is something to that too. For all the insanity that happens in these films, there's also that reality, right? Is that Ethan can't save everybody. He can't be everywhere at once. And therefore, him not being there is in some ways much more realistic than him, being able to witness the final, blow or something like that. It does, like you said, it leaves you feeling like, oh man, just like, I just wish it could have been different. But, that's, isn't that what so much of our lives are like? Man, I wish that could be different. And it's, it's not the way it happens.
Apparently, I wish more people were there to see it.
Exactly. And I'm gonna miss her as a character in this series. I think I'm a huge fan of Rebecca Ferguson, and I think she's done so much good for the Mission Impossible series, and I think she's done so much good for, of course, the character of Ethan and all of the other characters in the film. And so I'm glad that it does seem like she died doing something really incredible, which is, if Grace is Ethan's daughter, she died saving his daughter. And I think that's a worthy death for a character like this. So
I did want to add, if I could, that I loved what you said about Ethan not being able to save everyone, because it did remind me of the scene where, Grace is thinking about becoming part of IMF, and she says, but you guys will be there to save me. You'll keep me safe. And I love that he jumps in and says, I can't promise that. It's still your choice to become part of this or not. And people on your team will always do their best to try and save your life because your life matters to them. But it's not always possible.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a great pull, and it's absolutely, why he says that to her. I think he's thinking of the fact that there have been 2 women that he has loved that he could not save, that there was nothing he could do for. And of course, this being his daughter, most likely, is something to which, him saying, your life will always matter more to me than my own. I mean, what more could you want somebody to say about you than that? Which means that they will, and they are going to do everything they can to keep you alive, but that doesn't mean they were going to be able to do it. And so,
right.
This film, obviously has such, and it's even said a couple of times in the conversation around the idea of truth and the loss of truth. And, with the entity's ability to control the narrative, because it controls what you see, what you read, and in that way, then what you think of reality, it's become, Big Brother, a digital Big Brother. It's become Skynet, and it's interesting too, because, as we've talked about, it's cold and it's calculating, whereas, Ethan cares about people, even the one. And so, I found it fascinating, to really dig into this idea because, as McQuarrie and his partner are writing this film, we weren't at a place where ChatGPT existed the way it does now. AI wasn't in the same place that it is just a couple of years later, and I think there's a terrifyingness to this film because it's not all that far from actual reality of what people are terrified about. And I think also just the reality of, narratives finding a way to become the quote unquote truth, even though those narratives are later proved to be false. People still chant slogans and say things that we already know are not true because they've been proven with actual facts. But by the time it's already out there and been said 1 trillion times, people believe that is truth, whether or not the actual truth comes out. And I think this movie does such a great job with all this. And, watching it, I just found myself kind of terrified to this thought process. Not only just socially what we see with like social media, news, all of those type of things, but then when you think about the idea of, people being able to alter reality because they're altering digital reality, which is unfortunately becoming our reality. And I think it reminds us that, digital reality isn't reality. And we have to, and to be careful to not get sucked into a false reality in place of actual reality. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. God, there's so many messages here that I feel like you have to like break it down into its layers. There's absolutely what you're talking about with, the false reality and the loss of truth because people are, or the AI or whatever is controlling the narrative. It also is so relevant to us currently because of having AI involved now in things like art and the risk that poses for traditional artists, having their work stolen and repurposed into other things and not given any credit. And then even made me think of, how they call it they're always listening, where we have AI now in our devices like the Echo Dot and our phones that show you content relevant to things you've talked about or looked up on your search platform automatically. Or how if you have an Echo Dot, for example, ours sometimes will start talking inexplicably and we did not say the Q word. So definitely, there's all kinds of things in this message that are terrifying and are so relevant to our reality right now. So I think that this was a great pull to have as the villain that fits in this time in history, as well as just an interesting thing to explore in fiction.
Well, and I think it becomes the thing that, obviously this is one of those places where we've created and we've become our own worst enemy kind of thing. And so I like that is one of the layers that goes into this. And what you said there too about this idea of AI generated things, we have in the film, right? We have the entity mimicking Benji and taking Ethan on a wild goose chase that's leading him to a place where it can hopefully get him killed. And that is a reality, right? We can mimic people's voices to the point where now it would be very difficult unless there's some sort of digital marker in there to tell whether or not that's true or not, whether that's the truth. Mm-hmm. There was with Adobe Audition, which is what I use to record my native track for this podcast. I remember them coming out with this idea of being able to, what if you're recording something and you forgot to say something, that you could type in what you wanted to say and it would sample your voice to the point where you could then say those things and insert them into, even though you didn't say them at the moment. Well, okay, that's kind of cool because, that happens on a podcast every once in a while, right? You say the wrong, heck, it happens all the time. You say the wrong thing or the wrong name or, whatever, and you don't go back and correct yourself and it gets edited so nobody knows you made that mistake. You're after the fact. Well, but now we have that ability. You could make somebody say or do something that they didn't actually do, but make it seem like it's the truth. And unless there's some sort of digital marker in there, it could get to the point where it become too difficult to actually figure out what's reality and what's fiction. And I think that's the thing that this movie does that makes it really terrifying, right? And because we're seeing it. We've got that technology, and you can make a dead actor come back to life these days, by taking everything that they've ever done, putting that into the mixer, and to being able to create something that which would make it very difficult to say, oh, that didn't actually happen. And I think there's a danger in this kind of reality creation that we are experimenting with these days. And this movie is absolutely, I think, kind of pinpointing that, how dangerous it is, right? Which is the part of, the thing that the Mission Impossible franchise, especially with Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise, these last few films having worked so hard on, which is to make things as real as possible. That's why Tom Cruise does all these stunts, to make you know that the person is actually doing the thing, and therefore it's a real thing. It's not something fake, right? Which then really does leave you on the edge of your seat, because that person isn't just on a blue screen thing, having digital altered reality. And so, and as we mentioned, that hits different, right? Than knowing that person was never in danger, and that, so 100%. So we were talking about before we started recording this idea of the entity's minions. And, we have Gabriel specifically as this character who is the main minion, the main person and acting. He is the physical manifestation of the entity in reality to make, this entity's vision come to pass. And so I'm really interested to see what you thought of his portrayal and just him as, our main antagonist other than the entity for the film.
So I'm going to break it up into two pieces. For one, I just want to say I thought it was so interesting how biblical this was with his name and what he was tasked with doing. Because if you think about the name Gabriel and being, the Archangel Gabriel, he was a messenger of God. And here it's like Gabriel is the messenger of the entity, and he's sent here to do his will.
Yeah.
And that's so interesting. It just kept coming back to me like, I've got to look up more about this, because that's so interesting that they named him that.
Well, can I add one thing? Because I think you're 100% on track. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I would have forgotten. But the fact that basically he's a false messenger for a false god with a false religion, right? You think about it, there's the cruciform key, right? The cross is the thing that changes everything for Christianity, right? It all comes back to the cross and the resurrection. But that this is a false version of that, which is a whole thing about what we were just talking about with truth and fiction and lies and all that and deception. So thank you for bringing it, because 100%. Oh, I love that. Yeah.
And then having it be a cruciform key. I mean, it all fits together so well. What were they thinking about when they wrote this? And then two, I just wanted to say, I thought that it was really interesting the way that they made the entity come to life even more by showing how it was in real time erasing any evidence of Gabriel's actual existence. So there's no information digitally about him being born, where he's from, anything he's done that could be tracked digitally exists anymore. And anywhere that he would be recorded by a camera, the entity is erasing in real time. So it's literally like he's a ghost, even though he is a real human being who's still walking the earth. And I just thought that was like mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they make the joke in some way that the entity is the ghost in the shell, you know, based off that film, you know, and in many ways the entity itself is, you know, Big Brother in the shell. But yeah, Gabriel is the ghost in the shell, the one who is, you know, there but not there. And so I love that. I think you're absolutely right. And I thought he was great. The performance was fantastic. You know, he's wonderfully maniacal in the film. And I think what will be interesting to get a chance to hopefully in part 2 learn more about him, and that, you know, what his motivations are, you know, that it's not just about this rivalry maybe between him and Ethan, but that it's something so much deeper. But I think what's interesting here is that, of course, the entity has picked out the fact that he sees Ethan Hunt and the IMF being the only people that could stop him. Therefore, why wouldn't he then pit somebody against Ethan that brings up all of these emotions that hopefully makes it more difficult for Ethan to complete his mission? So again, it's like when you start to think about the way this has all been put together and the reasons why it's happening from the, you know, entity's standpoint, it's really smart writing. And I think that's something that's really awesome, which, you know, leads me to the character of Paris here in the film, you know, played by the same actress, you know, we know from the Guardians of the Galaxy films, playing Mantis. And I've always enjoyed her in those films, but it's so great to see her play a role that's completely different than that, you know, where she is somebody who seems to enjoy killing people, enjoy the mayhem, and then, you know, have a turn at the end. I thought she did a phenomenal job, specifically because she barely talks in the film, which is also something that's completely different for her as compared to what we get with Mantis. And so, amazing choice. And I think just so excited because, you know, we're kind of left up in the air as to whether or not she's actually died by the end of this film. So I'm thinking, you know, we could actually bring her back for the part 2, which I would love for that to happen. And
gonna throw out there first one more thing about her. Speaking of the biblical references, I love that, you know, they have Gabriel say, "You'll betray me."
Yes.
And that's why he tries to kill her. Now, she doesn't have a biblical name, but I just thought that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, her name is Pom Clementif, if I'm saying that right. And I absolutely loved her as Mantis, but it is so cool seeing her in a completely different capacity as this cold henchwoman who she really, I mean, was going at it full force trying to take Ethan down. And I think that's what makes it even better when later she comes back and saves him and says, "What else could I do since you spared my life?" And so I loved that juxtaposition of sometimes, or always, it's better to be the person that's the bigger person and spares someone than to react out of anger or whatever situation you're in. Because he easily could have decided to just take her out, but instead he decided to drop it and leave.
Well, and I think, you know, specifically what she's been about. I mean, she's been trying to kill what we think is possibly his daughter the whole time, and responsible for maybe ending the life of Ilsa as well, or, you know, helping to make that happen. And so, you know, what drives all of this is the personal nature for Ethan, as well as then everyone around him, you know, with Luther and Benji specifically. And so, no, I loved her in the role, and I'm hoping and I'm thinking that she'll be back in part 2, which is exciting because it'd be great to see her as being part of the team, right? The IMF team, having made the choice to join them and to try and stop, you know, this terrible power from taking over and possibly taking over the whole world, which, speaking of power, you had mentioned in our outline, and I thought was fantastic, the allure of power and the way in which, what would you do to be able to capture this amount of power and really this godlike power. We have Kittredge back here in this film and he says, this could allow us to be able to dictate what is true for everyone for generations to come, which is a godlike power. And we've talked about so many times on this show, and this I think is a really well done example of that the allure of having the power that's not meant to be ours in the first place, and how destructive it is, and how it can absolutely destroy everything that we've worked to build when we try and basically play God with this type of power. And, and those that are able to reject it and to say that no human being should have this amount of power in their own hands. This is because we can't deal with it well.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, exactly. That's why I wanted to make sure we talked about this, because ultimately that's what that key means to so many world leaders that know about its existence here, is that they're all racing to be the first one to get it, to have ultimate power, either so that someone else doesn't have it or so that they can achieve something with it. And that's why I love that Ethan says, no, we've just got to destroy it altogether, because no good can come from it. And ultimately what Kittredge is saying is, I want to be the one with the power, not I want to make sure everyone is safe.
Right.
And so, I love that even one of the other IMF agents that's sent on that train to get Hunt tells the other agent, I'm not interested in it whatsoever, because nobody should have that amount of power.
Right.
And I'm so glad that they have another character other than just Ethan or his team come to that realization and show that there are people out there that would say, I understand the temptation, but I don't want it.
Right. Right. I mean, to be able to be a person who can say, I understand the amount of power that I could have there, but that it's not right for me to have that power. I 100% agree with that. And I love that as part of the movie. I think it really, I think about the film, so much of it just fits so well thematically with everything that's happening in the rest of the movie. And it just goes to show you, I know McQuarrie and Cruise are kind of famous in this series for kind of making things up a lot of times as they go along. And yet it's strange to me how well all of this seems to work, even though that's the case. And so 100% agree with you. And I think, one of the things that the series has done, and it's continued to do, especially I think, since part 4, is that the action has continued to get bigger and better with every movie, and they're trying to find ways to do things that are different and interesting and as real as possible. From the car chases we get to the runaway train sequence we get, the cliff jump. I mean, they're doing as much of this for real as possible. And so, having walked through the series together, I'm really interested to see what you thought of the action in this movie, and if you felt like it lived up to what we've been getting, especially say for the last 3 films.
Yeah, so I mean, definitely, I would say they've upped the ante every time. I remember in Fallout specifically, the scene where they're climbing up the front side of a skyscraper, and in the past, of course, there have been really bad action scenes, like the ones we don't talk about in Mission Impossible 2.
Yes.
But here, I mean, it's like, I even am seeing the things that Tom Cruise is doing, because we know he's the number one guy for doing his own stunts, that I'm like, first of all, at his age, I worry for him. And then second, just for any actor, studios want them to continue to be around to keep doing more movies, especially someone as talented as Tom Cruise. So I'm sure they were terrified having somebody that is that talented and expensive doing such dangerous stuff. But he keeps doing it because that's what he loves doing. And he is absolutely a researcher first to make sure that he does everything the way that it should be done and the safest way. So I feel like that makes me feel a little better about it. But definitely the best action scene here is the cliff jump. I felt like the car chase was a little too long, and the train scene, there were too many cars for them to go through, but that they were good scenes, other than being a little too long.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me with all of these things is that, the car chase sequence in Italy, Fast 10 did a car chase sequence in Italy in some of these exact same locations. This looks 1,000 times better. So I appreciate it for that. The joke, too, of them continually going in circles around her was hysterical. I mean, I got major laughs.
That was cute.
When I went on the preview night and Thursday night, even though this had a few other preview nights. And, the train sequence, we just saw Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which had a train sequence where they're running on top of train cars and everything. And it looked like trash compared to this. I mean, this always feels as real as it possibly can. I mean, there are some parts where you can tell like something has been CGI'd, when the cars are finally falling. I think, a lot of that stuff is not, I don't think, completely real, of course, because there's no way you can actually do all of that safely.
I did want to say, if you look up some of the info on the production, how they did that scene originally, they planned on actually destroying a real bridge in Poland, because it was remote and it was kind of falling into disrepair anyway. So they had initially gotten the go-ahead to be able to use the bridge and blow it up for real for the movie. And then apparently there was a huge protest from historical groups that are, about saving landmarks and things, and then trying to see if it was repairable rather than just blatantly destroying it. And ultimately they got pushed out of doing that at all and had to figure it out doing in a rock quarry somewhere else and then adding in some CGI things. But they were actually going to blow up a real bridge with a real train on it. So,
yeah, I mean, I think, like you said, I was, reading some of the same things that you did. And the fact that, even though they couldn't do an actual bridge that existed, that they created as much of this as absolutely possible for them to do, so that it was as real as possible, and then augmenting where needed, of course, with CGI was fantastic. But I mean, even just them on top of the train doing the fights and everything feels like a real thing. And so, and of course, like you mentioned, I mean, this cliff jump, this is the first thing they filmed. They started with this because they knew if they could do this, they could do the rest of the movie. And it's an insane thing that they're doing, just like the Halo jump was in Fallout. And the amount of time and effort that went into that is the same amount of time and effort that they put into this. And it feels like it, right?
And if you haven't watched the video yet of how they put that together, we should share it on the social media page when we post this episode, because it's incredible. I mean, apparently just in training, he would do 30 skydives a day for several days in a row. He did over 13,000 motocross jumps to prepare for the motorcycle jump to then do the skydive. And then he did 6 takes of the actual jump off the cliff.
Yeah.
The man's a machine.
What else can you say, though, about and Tom Cruise, and when I went to see the movie today, and Chris McQuarrie come on before the movie starts just to thank people for coming to the theater. And, Tom Cruise says, we make these movies for people to come enjoy on the big screen. And I think you can feel it that they're creating films that are meant to be seen in the biggest format possible. And they're rewarding you for doing that with films and stunts that live up to the possibility of the big screen. And I think that's what makes this so special, right? That's why people have, continued to like these films. And so, I mean, the hard part about this is I feel like with each one of these movies, especially starting really with the Ghost Protocol and then with Rogue Nation, then Fallout, and now with Dead Reckoning Part 1, it becomes redundant. Like, what do I say differently than I said last time when it came to the action beats here? Because they're astounding, but unfortunately we've come to we've come to expect that they're astounding, but what's nice is that I don't have to think about whether or not the action is going to be good. They just find a way to create action that draws me in, has me on the edge of my seat, and loving every minute of it, instead of being like, oh, well, that doesn't look consistent. That looks kind of fake. Oh, I can tell that was done on a sound stage. Here, I'm not thinking about any of that because it just feels real. And I don't have to think I'm not pulled out every 5 seconds. And so, because it doesn't look right. And I got to say, too, with the music here, Lauren Balfe did the music for Fallout, which I liked, but I didn't love. But I felt like this score was so much, wasn't like it was bad for Fallout. I didn't personally love it. I thought that Joe Kramer, who had done Rogue Nation, was one of my absolute favorites for the series. And I really loved his work. And then Balfe did Fallout, which wasn't one that I just immediately gravitated towards. But this one, I thought he knocked it out of the park. And it really fit with the film. It drove all of the emotional beats that you needed, as hard as you needed, just driving a stake into your heart at some points. And so I thought he did a phenomenal job. And, it seems like he'll probably end up continuing with the series because Macquarie is a big fan of his. So phenomenal work, I thought, by him in this film.
Yeah, I'm with you. I really left feeling like I wanted to listen to this one in the car on the way home, and I did. And that's not usually my jam. But this was really the right feel. It felt larger than life, which is what you want to pair with the action in this kind of movie. And then yet also had those callbacks to the original theme, which is so important. But I like that too, in every iteration of the Mission Impossible movies, the theme fits in with the rest of the music a little bit differently, depending on the vibe of that particular film. Because if you go back and listen to the Mission Impossible theme from 5, it feels so much different than this one. So yeah, I was really impressed, which is funny because, you and I were talking about, I think for the Dungeons and Dragons movie, not loving Balfe's iteration there either.
Yeah, because part of it I felt like was great, and then other parts I didn't love. Like that one was kind of a mixed bag for me. Like there were definitely things I thought he knocked out of the park in that one, and then there were other parts where I didn't quite love the choice. But overall, I thought was good. I think this, he just nailed it out of the park from start to finish, which is exactly what you want in these films because, I think you don't want anything detracting from these movies. They've become so good that you don't want anything to not quite live up for you. And, music can make or break a movie. Thankfully, it's never happened, I felt like, really, with this series. Again, I don't care about 2 to talk about it or even remember it, but
I was gonna say except for 2.
Everything else that I think people have done have been good, and even rewatching Fallout recently, the music does fit the kind of more intense nature of that movie, where there's this drivingness to it and this slight almost darkness to it, whereas this one, because of the scenes that are going to happen with somebody like Ilsa's character, there's some romantic motifs that he plays with, specifically when those characters are on screen, or when they're together, or even just walking into the big rave party and it's playing this kind of more romantic theme, and until the big, bass comes in with the thumping nature of a rave music. There's just places like that. I loved his choices. So I could not agree more with you. I've really enjoyed listening to the score outside the film as much as I enjoyed listening to the score inside the film. So to me, that's always something that's very successful. And
there was one other thing that I wanted to add that I forgot to mention about the action. I don't know if it's much the action, but just the plot. I thought it was so interesting with the name for the movie. Sometimes you don't think about actively how much the name means something as well. And I don't know if you knew that the term Dead Reckoning was a real term for something, but I didn't. And apparently it's the process of calculating the current position of a moving object by using a previously determined position or a fix. So that's what they call it when the AI used its own technology to turn the torpedo back on the submarine. It used Dead Reckoning to determine the pathway to get there.
Well, and I love you bringing that up, because Dead Reckoning is also, in many ways, how we as human beings move forward, right? We move forward based off of where we've been and the truth of where we've been, right? And if we lose the truth of the matter, then we may end up in a place completely different than we thought we were going to be, because we had faulty information. And so the idea of, like you saying here, this whole movie is about this idea of truth and all. And so Dead Reckoning is not just about, a submarine, trying to find its way. It has to do with us. And if you take away the foundational nature of truth from our lives, you have no moorings. And you're just adrift. And you will, you're going to die. Because you're going to...
I was going to say, you wind up dead?
Yeah. So, no, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think it is a huge part to this film. And so, well, with all of that, Christy, I can't wait to kind of see where you end up with your ratings for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Well, I will say I went into this movie a little apprehensive just because of the runtime. So just be prepared. It is a 2-hour and 43-minute movie. But I have to say that once you're there watching it, it doesn't feel like it's actually that long. It feels like everything has a purpose, albeit for me feeling like, a couple of the action sequences were probably a little longer than I would have let them go. Overall, obviously you can tell from our conversation, I greatly enjoyed it. I think that it had so much weight to it, that Haley Atwell was such an awesome addition, and Pom Klementieff as Paris, and that I'm excited and interested to see what they reveal in part 2. So I give it a 4.5 out of 5 armored Humvees.
Nice.
Because that vehicle was really cool. But also just, it was such a fun movie, and it was so powerful, and the action was incredible. And I got to see it in IMAX, so go see that jump in IMAX, because it was great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I think, and I'm glad that you brought the runtime thing, right? Because one of the big detractors for us, and one of the big complaints that we had about the Dial of Destiny, was its bloated runtime. And that movie was less time than this, but still, I think it was 2:38, 2 hours 38 minutes.
Yeah, something like that.
I mean, I sat through this movie twice this weekend, and I thought at neither point was I bored or disinterested or looking at my watch or any of that stuff, because this movie cracks, right? Every moment is leading to the next moment, and the moments where we slow down, it's the perfect time to slow down and really, drive home the emotion of things. And so I was at a 4.5 out of 5 my first viewing, but I'm going to give this 5 stars. I don't think there's any reason not to give this 5 out of 5 cliff jumps, because it's another place where, I mean, it's different from whether or not I would consider this my favorite Mission Impossible movies. That's a different question. But I think what it's continuing to do is create fascinating stories with characters that I love, and do it in a way that keeps me coming back. And I'm not feeling let down, right? Since, I think for me, honestly, the third Mission Impossible movie onwards, I haven't been let down. And if 2 didn't exist, this entire series would only just get better every film. And I think in that way, this is not necessarily better than Fallout. I think it's just continued the perfection that, to me, Fallout and Rogue Nation were. And so to be able to have 3 films back to back that I would call 5-star movies is ridiculous in a series. And so I could not agree with you more, in the sense that this is a movie you see on the biggest screen possible. You see as many times as you can in a theater. Go see this in the theater, because you are driving the fact that with your dollars, you're saying you want more movies like this, and I want more movies like this. And so I hope that happens, not only with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2, but with every film. I want more movies to feel like this when I go to them. I want them to feel like experiences I can't have anywhere else. Yes, I'll still enjoy watching it at home when I do my, marathon of all the movies, but that the original experience is meant to be seen on the largest screen possible. And I'm so glad that Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise agree that they're making movies for people to enjoy corporately on the big screen together in a theater. I think that's fantastic. So, but Christy, if people, want to catch up with you and see what else you've got going on, where would they find you?
Well, you can find me, of course, on Letterboxd, Instagram, and Twitter at Bespin Bell. And then, I did a show with my friends Amanda and Teresa called Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland network. So I hope you'll check that out at Sabers and Spells online. And what about you?
Well, you can find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02. Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero are the places I'm most active, but just try social media with that name. You'll probably find me. You can also find me here on the network outside of the 602 Club with Literary Treks, The Orb, Warp 5, Saddle Up, and The Artificial Tango. You can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network with 2 shows. Owl Post, I did that with Drea Kaufman, and we talked about all the chapters of Harry Potter, 1 chapter at a time. And then Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?